Star Trek, The Nerdy Frontier. These are the discussions of the Good Times Society. Their continuing mission to explore each episode, to seek out new topics and ridiculous observations, to boldly watch what they've already watched before.
Now, I personally have never been shocked by an outlet or a computer panel before, but I feel that when it happens to me, I will also rear back my lips and bare my teeth and go,
flip backwards like a fish into all the panels and chairs behind you.
It was a good flop.
You know, Michael Dorn did not skimp on the reactionary work. I felt it.
Oh, man. I mean, really made a cliffhanger.
I was telling Xander that I think he wanted to show off the prosthetic teeth more than anything, right?
And I would too if I had to sit in a makeup chair all day and didn't get to show him. I had to call Bonnie in as I was watching it through this watch through because I forgot how funny it was. And just that moment.
Yeah, I watched that part twice. I didn't know he had prosthetic teeth in until then.
Oh yeah, the Klingons do not have great dental plans.
Or they have better.
Yeah, but now you see where he instigated that trend that all Klingons must now bare their teeth whenever they have a strong emotion.
Well, that's right. It's the episode The Lonely Among Us. Actually, it's just called Lonely Among Us, where while transporting delegates, an alien life form wreaks havoc on the Enterprise computer and begins to take over the minds of her crew. This was a fun one. I liked this one.
Yeah, and it seems like the delegates themselves are going to be the plot at the beginning. The Antikins versus the Selays, both going to decide, whether or not they're going to join the Federation, how these two planets within the same system are going to deal with their petty squabbles between them. And it was almost an A-B plot starting to develop. And then they just say, oh, yeah, never mind. We don't even care about what happened to them. You figure it out, Riker.
We'll remember to check in on them every once in a while, like the pets that they are. Otherwise, we're just going to continue on this better plot.
I think this was an example of a writing technique of focusing on a small event while a larger event is going on. And this was to show that when the Enterprise has guests, they still have to conduct their duties. They still have to act like everything is fine for the safety of the crew that's there, plus what they're representing as the Federation. And so it just shows not only how competent and amazing these officers are, but also how amazing these actors are. Because up in here, we stand Gates McFadden. Dr. Crusher, she was amazing this episode. I love her.
Yeah. There's some great wrist work.
Yeah, really, really impressive work when she, basically it's Invasion of the Body Snatchers kind of stuff, and we think it's a real bad entity, and then it turns out it's just kind of like down to float in space, and Picard's into it as well. He's got this part of him that's all about the wanderlust and thinks maybe he would fit in among the stars. Mm-hmm. But she has this moment where she comes into the bridge and she has this sort of lost out-of-body experience where she's experiencing the room for the first time, and it was just so brilliantly done. Great body work.
Especially when, as you mentioned in the synopsis, like this is a being that they encounter that is supposedly just pure energy. So this is an example of us coming across a life form that is completely different than ours in that it's another state of being. So the actors had a real great challenge in this on how would you react if you're experiencing being in a body for the first time and surrounded by aliens.
Hell yeah. Party on.
Yeah.
What was crazy about it too was that we didn't even know what was happening until very late in the episode, right? Because we learn eventually that it's just this being that was it pulled too close to the Enterprise and the Enterprise got too close to the cloud? What exactly happened?
They just skimmed the edge.
Yeah, it seemed like it got sucked up.
Like an exhaust?
Yeah, it got like sucked up into its circuitry or something was the explanation.
Now later on, yeah, the energy cloud that they had to double back and go to, it was like, you picked me up. It just sort of, picked me up like a hitchhiker. I thought I was being kidnapped, basically. It says in not so many words through Picard's mouth.
Right.
So you got sucked onto the ship and then just became within the computer and then started zapping people, which that was at first just hurting people and then like transferring through them, and then he accidentally kills Engineer Singh, right?
Assistant Chief Engineer Singh. And I had actually written a note that we're seeing more diversity in the background cast. There's more people of color overall. There's this Indian or South Asian actor, and then they kill him. I was a little bit upset because I was going to give him this compliment.
The deaths need to be equally diverse.
Yeah, that is something I thought of as well. And, at least the being apologized for it, and they all, said it was a horrible death. That was regrettable.
You know what they didn't need to apologize for was the legs on this crew, because we got more scants, baby. We've got scants for days.
Scant. Did we talk about the dress robes that they open the show with when they're waiting for the delegation of the Sile, the lizard people?
Those are formal scant.
Ooh, a formal scant. I am here for it. It's worn with pants. It's more of a wraparound ensign, the regular jacket. And it's got a gold lining on the collar and the crossover portion.
These were based on the Royal Navy uniforms of the 18th century, and they would be altered in season 2 as well. But yeah, they wear them actually, I think, every once in a while throughout the whole series.
Oh, if anybody has a QR code for how I can get that outfit in Animal Crossing, I'd really appreciate it.
I'm sure it'll exist. If not before, now it does.
The costumes that I was more focused on were definitely the Chuck E. Cheese level animatronics that were going on with the canine and reptile.
Oh, I wrote down a woolly, diarrhea-complected, meat-eating mammal.
I put wet makeup. They forgot that powder existed.
Oh, jeez.
It was like Power Rangers level movement on the face too.
Maybe that's why they needed them to not be the A-plot.
Someone who is currently, as you can attest to, wearing a Power Rangers sweatshirt. Yes, this is Power Rangers level of cheese.
I would definitely watch a whole episode of their warfare, though, I think, because they were playing hide and go seek to the death at one point.
Why didn't Riker get hurt when he was when it was like one of those things used to clean a pool, but just the edge of it, like they took the net out and put a glow stick in. Absolutely. And it was like, caught you, wrong species.
Wrong species.
Also, the Soleil people, the lizard people, said they wanted to be upwind of the Antikins in their dwellings. There's no upwind on a ship, bro. It would have been great had all the other Starfleet actors had to kind of hold their nose or made a funny smelling something bad face when Antikins got in here. That would have been a nice touch for me.
It's funny because though the two species, the delegates, act as sort of the foil for the audience in this one, in that they have to explain Starfleet protocols, and they act as a great buffer for explaining, what is a replicator? I've seen you eat meat. What does that mean when a human character on Star Trek is eating meat? Did they kill someone? Do they have a chef on board? This is a great way for them to explain, no, we have things called replicators. It is creating a facsimile of what you think is meat, but really it's using this energy and we can put it back in. So that, along with Wesley's explanation of the dilithium crystals, which comes from original series, and then the matter-antimatter reactions, are a way to sort of clue in those who are Trek fans into the technobabble that we're using now without having to have a classroom scene or something like that where they're just explaining it.
I did really love how Riker also explained what they don't do to animals anymore, which is enslave them for food purposes, which is a very utopian way of describing how they now eat meat in the future. And I really liked that, despite me being a meat eater.
And this is a real win for vegans everywhere, because this is a prototype of what we are working on discovering now, which is Petri dish meat. And they're talking about it already existing. It's another of those future-looking discoveries that they find in the writer's room that is coming to fruition.
One of the fun sort of world things that they sprinkle in every once in a while is that replicated food has a taste that you can tell that it's replicated. You sort of akin to some stale pasta or microwaved or a TV dinner or whatever it is. It just goes to show that even though they have this viable alternative, they still want to flavor it like the problems that we have today of I could eat this vegan option, but it was grown in a petri dish and you can tell that it's not meat just because of the way that it tastes. And it's come on, if it's the same thing, it's achieving the same ends, just let's go with it.
Even on a molecular level, there's still a little bit of mama's spice that you're missing.
Yeah.
Can we talk about the conference scene where a ball starts rolling? in Data's brain, and we would just want this thing to snowball forever. I have vague recollections of Data in Sherlock Holmes costumes. So when Picard starts mentioning the work of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, which I was like, 300 years in the future, would they still be referring, or, 400 years now? But of course, the same way we respect Shakespeare. And so Data... Sherlock Holmes, a detective, a sleuth. Interesting. Let me download all those files. I'm so ready for him with the little flappy-eared hat. I can't even wait.
Oh, buckle up. Yeah, it's good. It's just setting it up. You're exactly right. Of another trope episode, much like Holodeck Go Wrong, Data as Sherlock Holmes, potentially with either Picard or Riker with him, or Geordi as like assistants and things like that.
I have to say I was ready for it to be a little obnoxious, but man, when he was asked to put the pipe down in the conference with the captain, and then he was about to make a point and he reaches for it and then it stops himself, I lost it.
That's 100% Brent Spiner, the actor. Those were amazing choices that he was making that just make Data.
Same with probably the magnifying glass on the fishbowl at the end as well.
The definition of great acting is specificity. Everything is a choice and everything has meaning, and Brett Spiner just blows me away time and time again, especially in the scene where he's already read all the books and now he's inhabiting Data the Sleuth, and it's just the specificity of movement with his magnifying glass, and each thing is a choice to do it in a certain way now, as an android deciding to do it in the way that he has just learned through this book.
Not only that, but as a performer and as a gifted performer like he is, it's great to show the difference of like, I am playing an android, but look, when I shift into something else, the possibility. I could download any personality and I'm a good enough actor to pull it off. So it's just setting the potential for the character of Data to be inhabited by anything.
Do we think Brett Spiner really wanted to do this and got it shoehorned in, or that the writers had wanted him to do this anyway, and then he's like, all right, let's just go for it?
My guess is that it was probably a throwaway line that they were just trying to reference pop culture, and then maybe like Brent Spiner was like, oh, but what if we went further with this and I actually like started acting like Sherlock Holmes or something? That's just my guess, but I don't know.
I'm sure there was some contribution, either that or they saw him in some of the other episodes, like The Naked Now, and thought, we can throw anything at him, and it is going to be hilarious. We need to give this man an outlet. Could have been either one,
Yeah.
Every time he clapped his mouth down on that pipe, I also started laughing, and I didn't know where it came from.
It's something about the way he said, we have noticed that none of them were in the corridor, and he spins his computer around and then spins it right back and then bites on the pipe. So good.
Well, it'd be buku trouble if you're wrong.
So after a considerable amount of investigation time, Picard actually gets zapped by this thing, and it inhabits his body. And he pretty much takes over the whole situation, right? With very initial resistance from the crew, but then they decide it's not really a mutiny. I was trying to decide what it's called, just relieving him of command, I guess it was what it's called, right?
This is exactly what I was talking about with you, Becca, early on, when the doctor actually has the top rank on the ship. And this was the perfect example of that.
But it's harder for her to access it.
Yes, as it should be.
Yeah, because she needs to have the physical proof, whereas Riker can say, you're incapacitated for this reason, as he did when he met Picard. He said, I know that I need to be able to overrule you in certain scenarios if you're incapacitated.
If you notice, he also says he needs the support of the entire senior staff, so he actually has a few more hoops to go through than Crusher does. Crusher can perform a scan and say, I see you're unfit for duty because of this physical scan.
I understood that as he was choosing to, because the next thing that he says is that I haven't seen him do anything that would put us in jeopardy, and Troy believes that he will next. And I love this sort of the logistics of it, and they're not playing around. Like, immediately they all pick up on it, and it's important, especially with this older show. A lot of times there'll be a thing where it's like, yeah, we get it, we all understand, because these are tropes we've all worked from. And so when they're as wise to it as we are and pick up on it quickly, it's always better, because then you can get to the next thing to get back ahead of us.
Not only that, we saw the crew confront this issue before with actual Picard, and Troy says something like, I noticed noticed a duality in this person, and he flat out says, why didn't you say something? And she says, this sort of thing always exists. It's hard to pick out what is abnormal duality versus just your regular duality. And so this is her directly taking those orders and saying, hey, I'm sensing something funny now too. I can't prove it, but this is that same scenario, so I'm bringing it to our attention. It's good to see this crew come together. It's not just Picard holding them.
That's such a great point of that there's this duality within us all of the time. As she points out, when you ask yourself a question, who are you talking to? I love that line.
It's very 90s as well, because duality, and there's also a mention of hypnosis that they go through to try and like uncover the buried memories and stuff. That's very 90s as well. That was very like, or early, I guess late 80s as well. Is like that was starting to become a huge trend in like uncovering your real consciousness.
Yeah, hypnotherapy as medicine, as science. One of my favorite lines given though was Worf. I think they said like, "Oh, we've got to get down to the bottom of your memory block," and he goes, "I don't remember having one." And I was like, "Yeah, bud, that's kind of the point."
Yes.
We also see the range of all of the actors, not just Brent Spiner and Gates McFadden, but we see Patrick Stewart earn his title as Sir Patrick Stewart, and we also get to see a lighthearted Picard and sort of getting this information that we might not necessarily have to take this so seriously, because at the end of the day, there's like this greater plan, or we're all trying to figure everything out. So I think that at the end of it, after he's depossessed, sort of, we do see a change in the character, and I think it's a welcome change.
What change do we see?
Up until now, he's been so militant and so closed off. He saw his crew come together, and we see this sort of lightheartedness towards the end. And I've heard that Patrick Stewart was like that on set as well.
Yeah.
He was very much there to work, and the crew, the rest of the cast would kind of goof off. And I think this shows that he acknowledges their talent, they're acknowledging him, and they're working together.
Yeah, he was very stern at the top of this episode, as I recall, right?
You mean when his character lets it go because he says with the Antikins of the Sea League thing, nah, you deal with it. I'm over it. Peace.
That's something that the Picard of 2 episodes ago wouldn't have done.
He knows that murders of ambassadors has just occurred aboard his ship, that he's supposed to be escorting them to a diplomatic council, right? A place literally called Parliament.
We don't know that whatever reptilian meat that's being prepared was Seeley. Could be.
It could be anything.
They literally said one of them is missing, right? Didn't they? Like, they hit it over the head. Literally and figuratively.
Oh, you mean like hitting it over the head with a stick, with a glow stick on it?
Yeah. Or making sure that when you come through that you make a P for Picard on the console so that you know who's coming through.
That was such an interesting way. They had to figure out how to end this episode with like 3 pages left of where they had written themselves into, right? Like, even Geordi's like, so this is a huge cloud. Where do we go? And Riker's like, just fucking go somewhere. I figure it out.
He'll come to us, right? He can swim, right? He'll come closer.
Yeah, he'll float near us. We pick up drifters all the time.
Yeah. They go to the transport bay and they're like, okay, I hope this is it. And as they hit the button, the transport is taking so long. It's shimmering in like this narrow shape. And you're like, oh, maybe it's going to be something else. Maybe it's going to be a star creature. Wait, what's the time code? Okay, never mind. There's Picard. It's like, that might have been too easy.
Yeah, it's not the missing reptilian ambassador, unfortunately.
Oh, man.
This is the third sort of explanation I think that we're getting for this like magic technology, in that we're explaining what the pattern buffer is. How the transporters work is that it sort of demolecularizes you, puts you through the pattern buffer, and then transports you somewhere else where it's received or put on top of a planet and sort of reassembled. So this is bringing in the transporter existential question of, if you demolecularize someone and they remolecularize them somewhere else, is it really still the same person, even though that's where the consciousness is? In this case, Picard had beamed out, and so there was still a physical sort of pattern left in this pattern buffer of his body, and so the sort of consciousness, or this essence that it was only energy that was beamed out, would be brought back in. So in this new way that they're depicting depicting beaming, you see in a traditional beam animation, you've got like the sparkles for the body, and then there's a little bit of a holdover for this inner sort of light that you see, and that's sort of that energy representation. So this beaming back in of just energy merging with the physical like remembrance of like it's like hitting paste, where you're like, oh, I think the last thing I copied was Picard's body, you know?
Well, it's loading the last save file, isn't it?
100%. So then it's like, okay, the Picard that comes back, is that the real Picard, or are there two Picards that's now just an energy force out there?
No, they replicated the memory of him. I don't know where you fall on this, but like I'm pretty sure every time you go in a transporter, you die. Like Barclay was right, or like there's a couple of skeptics about transporting on the show. And you die, right? And then another clone of you forms of molecules down on the planet's surface or wherever you're transporting.
It's something that gets explored later, but this is sort of the first dip into that of like, what is beaming really? And when you're on the transporter pad, what happens? And why don't we have that yet? And what do we need to do to make that technology possible?
That's got to be a book in the 24th century.
Yeah, and do they like just incinerate the flesh sacks that were left behind before they replicate a new one?
Because what do you need?
What is beaming really? Is a poster you would see somewhere on like a Berkeley campus in 2460 or whatever.
Oh, absolutely.
It's also a great narrative tool of the transporter being sort of a catch-all of you can beam out of stressful situations, or if this body does get killed in space, maybe we can reload something. There's a sort of magic do-over button that's sort of built into the ship now.
Speaking of magic do-over, remember in episode 3, Code of Honor, our favorite episode, of course, not.
Yeah.
Okay, remember how Dr. Crusher was able to bring someone back to life? And then when Worf finds Assistant Chief Engineer Singh, he doesn't call the med bay. He calls to the captain and says he's dead. But if we have the technology to bring a warm body back to life, maybe we should have tried that. Just saying.
From the time Singh, like what happened to him, to the time that Worf checked his heartbeat, his heart had only stopped for about 12 seconds, which we still resuscitate people long after that right now. So yeah, they give up on him pretty quick.
I guess Worf just always had a thing against that guy.
This is also another trope that will show up and that we were kind of referencing earlier, in that Worf is just kind of bad at everything.
You know, I do want to do a segment one of these days about Worf's job performance. I think we'll wait until he becomes Chief Security Officer because he generally doesn't get the job done. And I really would like to revisit that. So we'll bookmark that for now.
Well, since we're on this topic of Worf just not being great at his job, and the very beginning of the episode, before he's the first one that gets the shock of blue energy, he's with Geordi, and he's like, oh yeah, boss is making me brush up on my skills because I'm a junior officer. I didn't realize he wasn't a full officer. He's like Wesley level of regard.
Yeah, and I think this is the journey that we get to see, because the initial impulse is to not make a show about the whole senior staff. The impulse is to get a glimpse of life at various stages of command. That was wrong, and they wanted everybody to be involved in all of the episodes, so they wanted to sort of rank up everybody to make those that are interesting, or the characters that we are invested in, higher up on the ship. And so there's sort of this journey that we get to go on. And I think the reference that Worf is talking about is directly about acting ensign Wesley Crusher type of thing, of like, oh, he wants the younger officers to study because he has scheduled time to study, so I must do this as well. It's a very Worf way of taking things.
We have to learn.
Yep, absolutely. And it's a good lesson in writing that you want your main characters to be roughly the same status, which is something I learned in an improv class where we were doing this specific format called the Pretty Flower. We have to keep coming back to the same place. And it just makes sense if your first established characters are all working at a shoe store and they're all employees at the shoe store or whatever. If they're all the same level, then it's not deferring to one person to answer all the questions.
That's it. That's exactly it.
Because if the captain didn't have these scenes where he's in the conference with all of his chief officers and he just always knows what to do and how to act, then you don't get that interplay of the relationships between them.
But I would say, though, don't other shows do that? And I can think of a sci-fi comparison, which is Battlestar Galactica does kind of span the levels of people throughout that society, right?
It's harder.
It is harder, and it's not what they needed to do, and they recognized that. I think what they were trying to find what the voice was here. Is it that we want to see glimpses of these families? Do we want to see glimpses of these officers? Do we want to see the kids? Do we want to see just the captain and the first officer like original series? And I think that they tried out some different things and sort of found this happy medium of, we set up tropes of episodes like a holodeck episode, but it's not always the same formula.
That makes sense. And I guess with something like Battlestar, they're spanning a lot of different stories, and those characters don't interact a lot, whereas these people are all on the same ship, and they want them to have that interaction. So that makes a lot more sense.
And to have opinions matter from the characters, because what Worf says over what Yar says, it's a totally different dynamic, and there's no discussion there. It's only who has the power.
Well, speaking of power,
What power do you have, Jake?
there was one hell of a lightning storm on that bridge, and I was very impressed by that. That was like a psychedelic concert. This episode was great. I liked this overall. I think this is one of my favorite ones that we've watched so far.
I agree. I feel like this is, again, them finding their footing of like where to take these stories, and they get really invested in the characters, and we see the beginnings of so many amazing things that are to come for these characters.
With each step we take forward, we get closer and closer to an A and B plot instead of just that A plot, as I said from the beginning, and we're getting there. And Data is, impresses me every time.
Same.
Favorite character in every episode.
Yeah, and the makeup will get less and less wet.
And he definitely gets more uniform in the way he acts as well. There's a little bit of the Spiner smirk in a lot of these early episodes, but I remember him straightening out later on.
There's a lot of discovery for these characters, because Geordi's trying to be the wisecracking thing, and he ends up as more of like the dad joke type of thing, but nobody's really found it quite yet.
Well, speaking of finding things, I definitely found adulthood with this next episode. This next episode is Justice. When Wesley Crusher is condemned to die on an idyllic, primitive planet, Captain Picard must face breaking the Prime Directive to save the boy's life. Do you remember this episode, Xander?
Vaguely.
Okay.
I know that they needed to establish Wesley as important enough for the captain to go save before we got there. So they've done a pretty good job so far.
Well, I'm excited to watch it, and I hope you're excited too. If you guys enjoyed this, please like, subscribe, and share this podcast with your friends. And if you want to talk about it, our link to our Discord is in the show notes, along with our social media on Instagram and Twitter. And if you want to support us, visit our Patreon and throw us a few bucks.
Thank you so much for reaching out both on Twitter or leaving an iTunes review, even just a talk track, because that's what we're here for. In a nice way. Civil.
Yeah.
Like a conference room.
Like a conference room.
Well, we appreciate all of you being
Engaging. Oh, I guess engaged.